A marshmallow almost destroyed my life. This crazy Karen called 911 on me for roasting marshmallows by my own lake, claiming I was breaking serious safety laws. She kept showing up at my door with citations and threats, making my life absolutely miserable for months. I was losing sleep, stressed out of my mind, and almost sold my dream house just to escape her harassment. But then I discovered something she'd been hiding about her own property that completely changed everything. What I found gave meth power to turn the tables in the most satisfying way possible. This is the wildest revenge story involving marshmallows you'll ever hear. Comment below what country you are watching from. That evening I was tending my fire pit just as my father had taught me when I heard footsteps crunching through dry leaves behind me. The sound was firm, purposeful. "Excuse me, sir," came a sharp, clipped voice. I turned to see a woman in her 60s approaching, dressed in a navy blue vest, covered in badges, holding a thick clipboard and wearing a body camera that was clearly recording. "Yes, ma'am," I asked, standing and brushing the dirt from my hands. She looked like she'd stepped straight out of a government handbook. Tight, gray-bin, wire-rimmed glasses, and a face that said I'd committed a federal offense. "I'm Victoria Hartwell, City Safety Inspector," she announced, speaking directly into the camera like she was reading an official report. "Subject is engaged in unauthorized combustion activity within 50 feet of a residential water source in violation. Off Municipal Code 15.7 subsection C. This activity poses a risk to community, environmental quality, and local property values under federal fire safety regulations." It was like watching a robot cite code, relentless and unsettling. She flipped open a citation form with blank fields ready to be filled in. She clearly hadn't stumbled on this by accident. "Ma'am, this is private property," I said, motioning tummy small, safely contained fire pit. "I've been doing this for 2 years without issue. I've got a water bucket cleared space and I'm roasting 1 marshmallow." She didn't blink, just kept flipping through laminated pages. "Ignorance of safety code is not a valid legal defense," she said, of pen scribbling across the form. "Open flame within the buffer zone requires permits from the fire marshal, environmental clearance from the Department of Natural Resources, and written HOA architectural review approval under Section 12 of the Covenant Agreement." Then she pulled out a thick binder of regulations, all with seals and citations, real enough to intimidate anyone who didn't have time to question them. As this bizarre scene unfolded, I noticed a teenager standing at the edge of my yard phone in hand, filming everything. It was Danny, my 17-year-old neighbor, who lived next door with his single mom. He usually kept to himself, always making videos for social media. But tonight, his eyes lit up like he'd stumbled into a live-action episode of reality TV. "Yo, this lady talks like a cop," he whispered to his phone, probably live streaming to his followers. "She's got all this official-looking stuff, but something feels off." I couldn't blame him. The way Victoria carried herself with all the jargon, paperwork, and authority felt way too intense for a simple neighborhood complaint. Then she handed me a citation. Thick paper-embossed seals, case numbers, fine print. Everything about it looked disturbingly real. It referenced municipal codes, federal regulations, and environmental laws. Enough legal language to make a tax attorney sweat. And at the bottom, a $300 fine for unauthorized open flame activity in a residential water protection zone. "You have 30 days tremit payment," Victoria said, clicking her high-end pen like a judge slamming a gavel. "Failure to comply will result in further penalties, possible criminal charges, and referral to the city prosecutor's office for legal action." But what government agency does Victoria actually work for? Comment below what you think Victoria's real job is. Type fake if you think something's suspicious. The next evening found me in a state of frustrated determination, armed with information I had gathered during my lunch break, spent calling every city office I could find. The Parks Department had never heard of Victoria Hartwell. The fire marshal's office insisted they don't employ any city safety inspectors. The Environmental Protection Agency had no record of any local representative answering her description. Even our HOA management company seemed genuinely confused when I described the citation in Victoria's claims about architectural review requirements. Either Victoria was operating under some obscure government department that didn't exist in any phone directory, or something was seriously wrong with this entire situation. Determined not to be intimidated by someone who might not even have legitimate authority, I decided to exercise my property rights and light another fire. This time I approached my evening marshmallow with the precision of a military operation. I cleared a wider safety perimeter around my fire pit, arranged 3 separate buckets of lake water within easy reach, and kept my flames smaller and more controlled than a birthday candle. I was roasting exactly 1 marshmallow, being more careful than a bomb disposal expert, when I heard Victoria's voice again. But this time she wasn't talking to me. She was speaking into what appeared to be a professional radio with the urgent tone of someone reporting a genuine emergency to dispatch. "Emergency response needed at 12 Oak Street," she said with the crisp authority of a seasoned first responder. "We have an active open flammivulation in progress near a residential water source. Subject is non-compliant with previous official citation and poses immediate risk to community safety and environmental protection." The way Victoria spoke into that radio was so convincing, so professional, that for a moment I questioned my own research and wondered if I really was violating some obscure law that I didn't understand. Her radio crackled with what sounded like official responses, complete with unit numbers and dispatch codes that added an extra layer of authenticity to her performance. She maintained that authoritative tone throughout the entire conversation, using terminology that sounded like it came straight from Apple's training manual. Within 10 minutes of her radio call, I heard the unmistakable sound of multiple emergency vehicles approaching our quiet residential street with full sirens and flashing lights blazing through the evening darkness. 3 fire trucks, 2 police cars, and an ambulance came screaming down our usually peaceful street like they were responding to a 5-alarm warehouse fire. Neighbors started emerging from their houses. Kids pointed at the emergency vehicles with wide eyes, and I felt my face burning with embarrassment as what appeared top half the city's first responders converged on my backyard to investigate my single marshmallow. Danny was there again with his phone, but this time he wasn't alone. At least a dozen neighbors had gathered on the sidewalk to see what catastrophic emergency was unfolding at my house. The flashing lights reflected off windows and cars, creating a scene that looked more like a disaster movie than a quiet suburban evening. The fire chief, a weathered man with decades of experience written in the deep lines of his face, approached my tiny controlled campfire with an expression of extreme confusion mixed with growing irritation. He glanced at the single marshmallow I'd been roasting then at the 3 buckets of safety water I'd prepared then at Victoria, who was standing nearby with her clipboard and body camera, looking like she was documenting evidence for a major incident report. "Ma'am," the fire chief said to Victoria with barrel-like consoled annoyance, "we received an emergency report about an uncontrolled brush fire threatening multi-residential structures. What I'm looking at here is a contained campfire with safety equipment and 1 marshmallow." His tone suggested he was not amused by having his entire department respond to what was clearly not an emergency situation. Victoria stepped forward with complete confidence, pulling out her fake badge and maintaining her official persona, even under the scrutiny of real law enforcement. "Chief, I need your badge number and incident report number for my official documentation," she said, speaking into her body camera like she was conducting a professional investigation. "This is the 2nd violation by this subject, and I need to ensure proper interagency coordination for my federal reporting requirements." That's when everything started falling apart for Victoria in the most spectacular way possible. The fire chief's expression shifted from confusion to suspicion as he examined her badge more closely, and his response would expose the truth that would change everything for our entire neighborhood. "Ma'am, I need to see your official identification and department credentials," the fire chief replied, his voice taking on the sharp edge of someone who just realized they might be dealing with a fraud. "What specific agency are you with, and under what authority are you conducting these inspections?" Victoria reached confidently for Hervis' pocket to produce what she clearly believed was convincing identification. But as she pulled out her badge, ice slipped from her fingers and clattered onto the concrete. The fire chief bent down, picked up the badge, examined it for approximately 3 seconds, and his face transformed from suspicious to genuinely angry as the truth became crystal clear to everyone watching. "This is a novelty badge you can order online for $12. The fire chief announced loud enough for all the gathered neighbors to hear clearly. "You're not with any government agency, are you, ma'am?" The crowd of neighbors pressed closer, sensing that something significant was about to be revealed, while Danny's phone captured every moment of what was clearly going to be a major exposure of deception. Under the combined scrutiny of genuine law enforcement and an audience of victims, Victoria's carefully constructed facade began crumbling like a house of cards in a windstorm. I'm a volunteer safety coordinator for the community," Victoria stammered, her confident official tone completely gone, replaced by the nervous uncertainty of someone caught in a lie. The fire chief was not impressed or amused by this revelation. "Ma'am, impersonating a government official is a felony under state and federal law. These citations you've been issuing have absolutely no legal authority whatsoever, and taking money under false pretenses constitutes fraud." As if a dam had burst, neighbors who'd been silent victims for months suddenly found their voices and started speaking up about their own experiences with Victoria's fake authority. "She fined me $200 for my mailbox being the wrong height," shouted the elderly man from 3 houses down, waving a citation that looked identical to mine. "She told me my garden gnome was a decorative safety hazard and charged me $150. Added the woman across the street, pulling out her own fraudulent fine. "She said my bird feeder was a Tractopus species and violated some environmental protection law. Cost me $225, called another neighbor. Denny's camera was capturing every revelation as the scope of Victoria's neighborhood witchery scheme became clear to everyone present. As the fire trucks prepared to leave and the genuine emergency responders expressed their frustration about being called to a fake emergency, the fire chief turned to address the growing crowd of neighbors who'd gathered to witness this spectacular exposure. "Folks, this woman has absolutely no authority to issue citations, fines, or any kind of official documentation. Any money you've paid her for alleged violations was obtained through fraud and impersonation of government officials. I strongly encourage everyone who has been victimized by this scheme to file police reports immediately." Victoria tried to retreat toward her house, but Denny's live stream was already exploding with viewers as word spread about the fake inspector who'd been caught red-handed in front of half the neighborhood. If Victoria's a fraud, how many neighbors has she already scammed? Comment on how much money you think Victoria stole from fake fines. Type scammed if this happened in your neighborhood. You'd think being publicly exposed as a fraud in front of genuine law enforcement and a dozen neighbors would make someone retreat and disappear. But Victoria had apparently did too much in her elaborate deception to give up without a fight. Over the following 2 weeks, instead of backing down, she escalated her fake authority campaign to levels that would have been comical if they weren't costing me and my neighbors serious money. Her first return visit came just 3 days after the fire department ended, and this time she arrived as a completely different type of official altogether. She knocked on my door wearing a different uniform, this one featuring a hard hat and reflective vest, and introduced herself as a municipal building code inspector who had received reports about structural violations on my property. Victoria's new persona came complete with an entirely different set of props and documentation. She carried a professional tablet computer instead of a clipboard, wore steel-toed boots that clicked authoritatively on my front steps, and brandished what apparetto be official building inspection equipment, including a laser measuring device and a digital camera with multiple lenses. "Sir, I'm here to conduct a mandatory safety inspection of your deck railing system," she announced, speaking into her ever-present body camera with the confidence of someone who done this 1,000 times before. "Recent municipal surveys have identified Multiple properties in this district with railing heights that fall below current building code requirements established by the International Building Conference Safety Standards. She proceeded to measure my deck railing with scientific precision, taking photos from multiple angles and making notes on her tablet that she claimed were being uploaded directly to a municipal database. According to Victoria's measurements, my railing was allegedly too low, creating what she described as a critical fall hazard that violated Section 4.7 of the Municipal Building Code. The citation she produced was even more elaborate than her previous effort, printed on heavy cardstock with multiple official-looking seals and a QR code that she claimed would allow me to pay the fine online through the city's payment portal. The amount for this imaginary violation was $300, bringing me total fake debt to $600 for problems that didn't actually exist. But Victoria was just getting started with her escalation campaign. Her next visit came exactly 1 week later, and this time she transformed herself into an environmental protection officer, complete with a different uniform, different equipment, and a completely different set of fake regulations to enforce. She arrived in what appeared to be an official government vehicle, a white SUV with magnetic signs reading Municipal Environmental Division, complete with yellow flashing lights and even a small loudspeaker that she used to announce her arrival. Attention property owner, this is an official environmental compliance inspection, her amplified voice declared as she pulled into my driveway like she was conducting a federal raid. This time, Victoria claimed that soil samples taken near my fire pit had revealed elevated levels of ash and carbon particulate that were allegedly leaching into the groundwater and threatening the local ecosystem. She produced scientific-looking test results printed on official letterhead, complete with charts, graphs, and laboratory analysis that would have convinced anyone without a chemistry background, according to her fake environmental report. My fire pit was creating a persistent contamination source that violated multiple EPA regulations and threatened the water quality for the entire neighborhood. The fine for this elaborate fiction was $400, and she warned me that continued violations could result in federal environmental crimes charges and potential imprisonment. Victoria's final performance in this escalation campaign was her most ambitious yet. She returned 2 weeks later as a federal safety auditor, conducting what she called a comprehensive residential security assessment as part of a new Department of Homeland Security initiative. This time she'd acquired an even more impressive vehicle, set up complete with additional flashing lights, official-looking decals, and equipment that included a briefcase full of what appeared to be federal forms and regulations. She wore a uniform that looked like it came from a government surplus store, complete with patches and badges that referenced agencies I'd never heard of, but sounded appropriately official and intimidating, according to federal safety auditor. Victoria, my outdoor electrical outlet, posed a critical infrastructural belala that could be exploited by terrorists or foreign agents to disrupt the local power grid. She produced a documentation that appeared to reference actual federal security regulations, complete with case studies of similar vulnerability that had allegedly been exploited in other cities. Her inspection involved photographing my electrical setup from multiple angles, taking measurements with various official-looking devices, and filling out forms that she claimed were being transmitted directly to federal security databases. The citation for this imaginary national security threat was $500, bringing my total fake debt to $1,400 for violations that existed only in Victoria's elaborate fantasy world. The financial pressure was becoming genuinely stressful, affecting my work performance and my sleep as I worried about what new impossible violation Victoria might invent next. I'd stopped enjoying my evening time by the lake because I was constantly watching for her next appearance, wondering what costume she'd wear and what expensive fiction she'd create. The worst part was the isolation. Victoria had been so convincing that several neighbors actually believed I was some kind of safety hazard and had started avoiding me entirely. I even found myself seriously considering selling my house and moving somewhere else, somewhere I could roast marshmallows without being terrorized by an elaborate fraud operation. But while I was suffering under the weight of Victoria's escalating deception, Danny was having the time of his life documenting her increasingly elaborate performances for his growing audience of followers. His daily fake Inspector Lady updates had become must-watch content for people fascinated by the audacity and creativity of Victoria's fraud scheme. His followers were offering theories, advice, and encouragement, turning my neighborhood nightmare into viral entertainment that was attracting viewers from around the country who had never seen anything quite like Victoria's commitment to her fake authority roles. One evening, as Danny 1817 was filming Victoria's latest patrol of the neighborhood from his bedroom window, he noticed something that 1822 everyone else had completely missed in all the drama of fake uniforms and fraudulent citations. "Guys, check this 1828 out," he whispered to his camera, zooming in on Victoria's house across the street. "This lady's water pressure 1834 is terrible, like really, really terrible. I can see her bathroom window from here, and when she turns on the 1840 shower, it's just a weak trickle that barely works. That's weird, right? My mom works for a plumbing company and she 1846. Always says that low water pressure usually means there's a serious problem with the main line connection or the 1852 service setup. What's wrong with Victoria's water and why? Is she hiding it? Comment on what you think Victoria hiding about her house. Type water if you spotted the clue." DUI's casual observation about Victoria's terrible water pressure sparked a flood of comments from his followers. Many of whom had experience with plumbing construction and property management issues. They encouraged him to investigate further, suggesting that someone who was working so hard to project authority might be hiding troubles of her own. Danny, never one to back down from a challenge that might generate viral content, decided to spend a Saturday afternoon at the county records office. Armed with his smartphone, a notebook, and a determination to uncover whatever Victoria was hiding about her property situation. What he discovered in Thostisty files would provide me with the ultimate weapon to turn the tables on our neighborhood fraud. The county records office turned out to be a treasure trove of information that Danny documented meticulously for his followers. Using his phone to record his research process, he explained how property records are public information that anyone can access with just an address and a small copying fee. "So, I'm looking up Victoria's house to see if there's anything weird about it," he explained to his camera while flipping through decades of paperwork. "Property records show everything. When the house was built, who owned it, any modifications, and most importantly for this situation, how utilities are connected, and whether there are any special agreements with neighboring properties." The breakthrough came when Danny found the original building permits and utility connection documents from when Victoria's house was constructed in 1978, according to the paperwork. Thebelder had faced a significant challenge because Victoria's lot was positioned in a way that made a direct connection to the main city water line extremely expensive and technically difficult. The solution they had chosen was to run Victoria's water service line across the corner of what would eventually become my property, connecting to the main line at a point that was much more accessible and cost-effective. This arrangement was perfectly legal at the time, covered by something called an easement agreement that gave Victoria's property the permanent right to run utilities through my land. But easement agreements, as Danny discovered through additional research that he documented step-by-step for his audience, are not automatically permanent. They have specific terms, renewal requirements, and expiration dates that must be maintained, according to county regulations. "Guys, this is where it gets really interesting," Danny said to his camera, holding up an official document that would change everything. Victoria's easement agreement for her water line was supposed to be renewed every 10 years, and according to these records, it expired in 2021 and was never renewed. That means her entire water supply is running through Marcus' property without legal permission. The implications of this discovery were staggering, and Daniel explained them with the excitement of someone who just solved a major mystery. Victoria's house had no direct connection to the city water main. Her entire water supply, every shower, every toilet flush, Every glass of drinking water depended on a pipe that was now illegally trespassing on my property without my knowledge or consent. The Dot Water Company was still billing Victoria for service and had no idea that her connection was unauthorized because of what appeared to be an administrative oversight in their system. With one phone call to the utility company, Dot could legally demand the immediate disconnection of her service and force her to spend tens of thousands of dollars to establish a new legal connection to her property. Danny had documented everything, with photos and video evidence, creating a comprehensive paper trail that would satisfy any lawyer or government official. The irony was so perfect it seemed almost fictional. While Victoria was running around the neighborhood in fake uniforms, issuing fraudulent citations and threatening people with imaginary legal consequences, she was literalisting utilities from the very person she was harassing most aggressively. The woman who had been terrorizing me with fake authority was completely dependent on my property for one of life's most basic necessities, and she apparently had no idea that I was about to discover her vulnerability. I spent that Sunday morning on the phone with the water utility company, carefully explaining the situation and providing them with copies of the expired easement document that Danny had obtained through his research. The customer service representative seemed genuinely confused at first. Apparently, utility companies don't encounter this type of situation very often in their normal operations. After being transferred to a supervisor, then to someone in their legal compliance department, the response was crystal clear and immediately actionable. Sir, if the easement agreement has expired and hasn't been renewed according to county requirements, then that water connection is unauthorized and illegal. We'll need to disconnect service to that line immediately upon your formal request. The power I'd been desperately seeking was literally in my hands, just one phone call away from being executed. I could end Victoria's elaborate fraud operation instantly by cutting off the utilities that made her house livable, forcing her to face the reality that her fake authority meant nothing when confronted with genuine legal power. But instead of making that call immediately, I decided to give Victoria one final opportunity to face the truth about what she'd been doing to our neighborhood. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening, and Victoria had already announced her intention to call for a permanent community-wide ban on all open flame activities. Victoria was planning to use her fake authority one more time to try to force a vote that would effectively banish me from my own backyard, turning her personal vendetta into official community policy. Instead, that meeting would become the stage. Fourth most dramatic reversal of fortune our quiet neighborhood had ever witnessed. I would reveal not only Victoria's fake inspector fraud, but also her illegal theft of utilities that had been going on for years without detection. The woman who had been wielding fake power like a weapon was about to discover what real legal authority actually looked like. Danny was practically vibrating with anticipation as we planned how to reveal Victoria's secret at the meeting. His followers were already invested in the story, and he was determined to document the confrontation for maximum impact on his growing audience. We had documentation, we had legal standing, and we had the element of complete surprise. Victoria had no idea that her carefully constructed world of fake authority was about to collapse around her, or that her own home was about to become uninhabitable, unless she could somehow afford a solution that would cost more money than she'd stolen from the entire neighborhood. Will Marcus actually cut off her water, or will Victoria find out first? Comment on what you would do with this power. Type cut off if you'd shut off her water immediately. Thursday evening arrived with the kind of crisp October air that made me want to build a fire and roast marshmallows, which felt like perfect irony given what was about to unfold at our community center. Victoria had sent elaborate official-looking notices to every house in the neighborhood over the past week, complete with fake government letterhead, legal terminology that would impress a law professor, and urgent language about critical community safety measures that require immediate resident input and voting. She had managed to reserve the community center meeting room by apparently lying to the staff about being a government official, conducting mandatory safety briefings, and she'd prepared for this meeting like it was the most important presentation of her fraudulent career? When I arrived at the community center, I found Victoria standing at the front of the room in her most elaborate costume yet. A navy blue blazer covered with fake badges and patches, a clipboard that had been upgraded to a leather portfolio thick with laminated documents, and that ridiculous body camera recording. Everything for what she claimed were federal record-keeping requirements. She'd set up what appeared to be a complete government presentation, including a projection screen, official-looking charts and graphs, and a table covered with evidence folders that suggested this was a serious legal proceeding rather than a neighborhood meeting about backyard fires. About 15 neighbors had shown up, which was actually an impressive turnout for our usually apathetic community that typically ignored HOA meetings entirely. I could see the elderly couple from down the street who had been fined for their mailbox height, the single mom who'd been cited for her excessive garden decorations, several other familiar schwad fallen victim to Victoria's fake authority over the past few months, and a few curious residents who'd heard rumors about the neighborhood drama and wanted to see what was happening. Danny was positioned in the back corner with his phone already recording streaming live to what he told me was over 200 viewers who were eager to see how this confrontation would play out. Victoria called the meeting to order with the grave authority of someone chairing a congressional hearing on national security. Ladies and gentlemen, we're here tonight to address a serious and ongoing threat to our community safety, property values, and legal compliance with federal fire safety regulations. She announced, gesturing toward a presentation screen that displayed what appeared to be official fire safety statistics and legal precedents. One resident in our community has repeatedly violated multiple municipal and federal fire safety codes despite receiving official citations, warnings, and direct intervention from emergency services personnel. Tonight we need to vote on implementing a permanent ban on all open flame activities within our community boundaries to protect our families and our property investments. For the next 20 minutes, Victoria delivered a presentation that would have been genuinely impressive if anyone had bothered to verify that her statistics, case studies, and legal references were completely fictional. She cited imaginary fire department studies showing increased property damage in communities that allowed backyard fires. She referenced non-existent insurance industry reports about liability exposure for neighborhoods with uncontrolled combustion activities. She quoted fictional federal safety experts about the risks of private fire pits near water sources. Her presentation included charts showing property value impacts, graphs displaying fire incident correlations, and legal precedents from court cases that existed only in her imagination. Several neighbors were nodding along with Victoria's presentation, clearly impressed by her apparent expertise and concerned about the potential risks she was describing with such authority and detail. She pulled out thick folders of what appeared to be incident reports, fire safety studies, and legal documentation that supported every point of her proposed ban. Victoria had prepared answers for potential questions, backup documentation for every claim, and speaking points that addressed common concerns about property rights versus community safety. If you didn't know that she'd fabricated every single document in those folders, her presentation would have been completely convincing. When Victoria finally called for questions before the official vote, I knew it was time to reveal the truth that would destroy her elaborate deception once and for all. Before we vote on anything tonight, I said, standing up and pulling out my own folder of very real documentation. I think everyone here deserves to know the truth about Victoria's authority to call this meeting and her own serious legal violations that she's been hiding from this community. The room immediately went quiet as I walked to the front, and I could see Victoria's confident expression starting to crack as she realized her carefully planned meeting was about to become something entirely different. First, I continued addressing the neighbors who'd been victimized by months of fake fines and fraudulent citations. Victoria isn't a government inspector of any kind. The fire chief confirmed 2 weeks ago when 3 foray trucks responded to my Marshmallow that all her citations are fake. Her badges are novelty items you can buy online, and anyone who paid her fines was the victim of fraud and impersonation of federal officials. Murmurs started rippling through the crowd as neighbors who had been intimidated into paying fake fines began to realize the scope of Victoria's deception and their own victimization. But I wasn't finished revealing Victoria's secrets, and the biggest bombshell was still coming. Second, while Victoria's been running around our neighborhood for months, issuing fake violations to everyone else, she's been committing a very real violation herself that affects my property directly. One held up the county records that Danny had obtained through his research, and Theron's attention focused completely on what I was about to reveal. Victoria's house gets all its water through a pipe that runs under my property, and her legal right to that water connection expired 3 years ago. She's been stealing utilities from my land while threatening me with fake legal action and fraud. The room erupted in shocked conversations as implications of this revelation sank in among neighbors who were processing the fact that their neighborhood author figure was not only a fraud, but also a thief. Victoria has been illegally using my property for her basic utilities while harassing me with fake government authority. I continued raising my voice to be heard over the growing buzz of conversations. One phone call from me to the water company, and her house becomes unlivable because she have no water service and no legal way to get it restored without spending tens of thousands of dollars she clearly doesn't have. Victoria's carefully constructed facade completely collapsed in that moment. Like a building whose foundation had been destroyed, the confident government official persona disappeared entirely, replaced by a panicked elderly woman who'd been caught in the most elaborate tele our neighborhood had ever witnessed. "You can't do this to me," she shouted, abandoning any pretense of official authority or professional composure. "I'll sue you. I'll report you to the real authorities. This is harassment and discrimination against a senior citizen." But everyone in that room could see that the person who had been enterizing them with fake power was actually the most vulnerable and desperate person in the entire community. DY's live stream was exploding with comments as viewers watched Victoria's public meltdown in real time, and I knew that her reign of fake authority was finally over. The neighbors who'd been intimidated in Tosselins for months were suddenly finding their voices sharing stories about fake fines and fraudulent citations. While Victoria continued her desperate protests that convinced no one and only made her look more pathetic, the meeting that was supposed to ban me from my own backyard had instead exposed the biggest fraud our community had ever seen. How will Victoria react when she finds out Marcus can destroy her life? Comment on how you think Victoria will try to save herself. Type desperate if you think she beg. The next morning, I made the phone call that would change everything for Victoria and finally give me the justice I'd been seeking for months off harassment and financial fraud. After confirming my identity and property ownership with the Water Utility Company's Legal Compliance Department, I formally requested the immediate disconnection of the unauthorized watt line that had been trespassing on my property for over 3 years without my knowledge or permission. The utility representative was apologetic about their administrative oversight and assured me that a disconnection crew would handle the unauthorized connection within 15 business days exactly as required by state law and Utility Commission regulations. They also informed me that Victoria would receive official notice of the pending disconnection, along with detailed information about how to apply for a new legal service connection to her property. I have to admit that I felt a complex mixture of satisfaction and uncertainty as I hung up the phone after making that call. Victoria had made my life genuinely miserable for months with her elaborate fake authority scheme, stolen hundreds of dollars from me and my neighbors through fraudulent fines, and terrorized our entire community with threats of imaginary legal consequences. She'd impersonated government officials, filed false police reports, and created an atmosphere of fear and confusion that had affected everyone on our street. But cutting off someone's water supply felt like wielding nuclear power, and I couldn't help wondering if I was crossing a line from justice into revenge. Still, Victoria had brought this situation entirely on herself through years of illegal utility theft and months of systematic fraud against innocent neighbors who done nothing wrong except try to live peacefully in their own homes. The legal system was working exactly as intended. Actions have consequences. Laws exist for good reasons, and people who abuse others eventually face accountability for their choices. Victoria was about to learn these lessons in the most expensive and uncomfortable way possible, and I reminded myself that she'd had multiple opportunities to stop her fraud operation before it reached this point. Victoria received her official disconnection notice from the utility company on Monday morning, delivered by certified mail with return receipt, required to ensure there was no question about her receiving proper legal notice. By Monday afternoon, she was standing on my front porch. But the transformation from her previous appearances was so dramatic that I barely recognized her as same person who'd been terrorizing our neighborhood with fake authority for months. Gone was the confident woman in official uniforms with badges and clipboards and body cameras. Instead, I found a broken, desperate person who looked like she'd aged 10 years over a single weekend of facing reality. Victoria's fake uniform had been replaced by a wrinkled sweater and jeans that suggested she'd been too distraught to care about her appearance. Her authoritative clipboard had been abandoned in favor of a box of tissues, and the tears streaming down her face were obviously genuine rather than the calculated performances she'd been giving for months. When I opened my front door, she immediately dropped to her knees on my welcome mat without any regard for her dignity, begging in a voice I'd never heard from her before. "Please," she sobbed, "I'm sorry about everything I've done. I'll pay back every penny I took from everyone in the neighborhood. I'll resign from the HOA permanently. I'll never bother you or anyone else again. Just please don't cut off my water." And her next confession revealed the true scope of her deception and the desperate financial situation that had driven her to such elaborate fraud. "I'm an old woman on a fixed income," she continued, "and I can't afford $22,000 to reroute a new water connection. I don't have that kind of money. I don't have any money left at all." But Victoria's most shocking revelation was still coming, and it would explain not only her financial desperation, but also the psychological emotion behind her months-long campaign of fake authority and neighborhood terrorism. "I spent my entire retirement savings on all of this equipment," she said, gesturing toward the surveillance cameras, fake uniforms, official-looking vehicle, and technical equipment that were visible on her property. The cameras, the uniforms, the vehicle modifications, all the fake documents and badges. It cost me everything I had saved for my retirement years. When my husband died 5 years ago, I felt so powerless, so invisible, so completely irrelevant. Nobody respected me anymore. Nobody listened to anything I had to say. I thought if I could be an authority figure, if I could have some control over something, I'd feel important again instead of just being a forgotten old woman that everyone ignores. The psychological profile that emerged from Victoria's tearful confession was both heartbreaking and disturbing in its honesty about grief, loneliness, and the desperate need for relevance in a world that had seemingly forgotten her existence. But her financial confession revealed an even more serious problem that explained why she was so terrified about losing her water service. "I took out loans against me house to pay for all the equipment and uniforms," she admitted, her voice breaking with shame and fear. "I'm already 3 months behind on my mortgage payments because I spent everything on trying to feel important again. Without water, the house becomes legally uninhabitable and the bank will foreclose within 60 days. Victoria wasn't just facing the loss of her water service. She was facing the complete destruction of her life, including her home, her financial security, and what little dignity she had left after being exposed as a fraud in front of the entire neighborhood. Her fake authority scheme had been a desperate attempt to feel powerful and relevant, while her real life crumbled around her due to grief, poor financial decisions, and an inability to cope with the isolation that many elderly people experience after losing their spouse. The consequences of both her illegal utility theft and her elaborate fraud operation were converging into a perfect storm of personal catastrophe. I looked down at this woman who'd made my life hell for months, who'd stolen money from hardworking neighbors, who'd impersonated government officials and terrorized people who couldn't afford to fight back against fake authority. Part of me wanted to help her to show mercy to someone who was clearly suffering from grief, loneliness, and mental health issues that had driven her to desperate measures. But then I remembered the stress she'd caused me that had affected me work. And sleep, the money she'd stolen from neighbors who trusted her fake authority, and the fear she'd instilled doubt in people like Denny's mom who couldn't afford legal help to fight fraudulent citations. "Victoria," I said firmly, looking directly at this woman who tried to destroy my peace and steal my money, "you chose to hurt innocent people to make yourself feel powerful. You had opportunities to stop this fraud at any point, but instead you escalated it and involved more victims. Now you need to face the real consequences of those choices." I stepped back and firmly closed my door, leaving Victoria on my porch to contemplate the reality that her elaborate deception had finally caught up with her, in the most devastating way possible. What happens when a house has no water for 15 days? Comment: if Marcus made the right choice. Type justice if Victoria deserved the sending. 15 days later, exactly as the utility company had promised in their official notice, a work crew arrived at my house at 8 o'clock in the morning to disconnect Victoria's illegal water service line from my property. I watched from my kitchen window as they efficiently located the unauthorized county that had been stealing my utilities for over 3 years. And I felt a sense of closure as they permanently off the pipe that had made Victoria's elaborate fraud operation possible. The disconnection process took less than 2 hours, but those 2 hours marked the definitive end of Victoria's theft of my utilities and her months-long campaign of fake authority that had terrorized our entire neighborhood. By 10 o'clock that morning, Victoria's house officially had no running water, making it legally uninhabitable according to county health codes and unsuitable for human occupation. The for all sign appeared in Victoria's front yard within exactly 48 hours of the water disconnection, and the asking price told the complete story of her financial desperation and urgent need for immediate cash. She was listing her house for $30,000 below current market value, clearly hoping for the fastest possible sale that would pay off her mortgage debt and leave her with enough money to relocate somewhere she could afford to live. Danny documented every stage of this process for his followers, creating a final episode of his Fake Inspector Lady series that would become the most viewed content he'd ever produced and establish him as a social media creator with serious investigative skills. The video of Victoria loading her belongings into a rented moving truck while I peacefully roasted marshmallows in my backyard became an instant viral sensation that exceeded all of Denny's previous content in terms of views, shares, and engagement. The footage hit over 3.2 million views in the first week alone, with comments flooding in from viewers around the world who were fascinated by the complete reversal of power dynamics and the satisfying conclusion of our neighborhood drama. The hashtag that emerged organically from Denny's content, Marshmallow Justice, became a rallying cry for people who dealt with abusive HOA officials, fake authority figures, fraudulent citations, and neighborhood bullies who abused their perceived power. Comments poured in from across the country and around the world, with viewers sharing their own stories of encounters with people like Victoria who use fake or exaggerated authority to intimidate and financially exploit their neighbors. Local news stations picked up the story after Denny's video went viral, running investigative segments about the dangers of fake government officials, the importance of verifying credentials before paying any fines or citations, and the legal consequences of impersonating federal or local authorities. Victoria's elaborate fraud scheme had backfired so spectacularly that she'd become a cautionary tale broadcast on television stations and shared on social media platforms nationwide. The legal aftermath of Victoria's exposure was swift, comprehensive, and exactly what she deserved. After months of systematic fraud against innocent people, several neighbors filed detailed police reports about the fraudulent fines they'd been intimidated into paying, providing evidence that led to a criminal investigation that would follow Victoria to whatever city she relocated to after selling her house. The HOA board held an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to permanently ban Victoria from all future meetings, common areas, and any involvement in community decisions, effectively ostracizing her from the neighborhood she'd tried to control through deception and fake authority. Most satisfying of all, the county prosecutor's office announced they were pursuing multiple felony charges against Victoria, including impersonating government officials, fraud filing falsipolious reports, and theft by deception. Serious crimes that carry substantial penalties and would create a permanent criminal record that would affect Victoria for the rest of her life. The prosecutor's office also issued a public warning about fake citation scams and encouraged anyone who'd been victimized by similar fraud to report it. Through deception and fake authority. Most satisfying of all, the county prosecutor's office announced they were pursuing multiple felony charges against Victoria, including impersonating government officials, fraud filing false police reports, and theft by deception. Serious crimes that carry substantial penalties and would create a permanent criminal record that would affect Victoria for the rest of her life. The prosecutor's office also issued a public warning about fake citation scams and encouraged anyone who'd been victimized by similar fraud to report it immediately to prevent other communities from suffering the same type of systematic deception. But the real victory wasn't about Victoria's punishment or legal consequences. It was about the complete transformation of our neighborhood culture and the restoration of genuine community that her fake authority had been preventing for months. The young family who purchased Victoria's house at the discounted price turned out to be exactly the kind of neighbors our community had been hoping for. They had 2 elementary school children who were immediately fascinated in my fire pit and eager to learn the proper techniques for roasting marshmallows safely and effectively. Within just 1 month of Victoria's departure, what had started as my solitary evening ritual had evolved into Marshmallow Friday, a weekly neighborhood gathering where families brought their children to enjoy the fire share stories and build the kind of authentic community connections that Victoria's campaign of fear and fake authority had been systematically destroying. Danny's social media success from documenting our entire neighborhood saga earned him over 500,000 followers across multiple platforms and several lucrative sponsorship deals that would help fund his college education. More importantly, his investigation skills, willingness to research public records, and courage to stand up to fake authority figures had made him something of a local hero among teenagers who were tired of being dismissed or intimidated by adults who abused their perceived power. He'd proven that sometimes the most effective resistance comes from people who are supposedly powerless and that modern technology gives everyone the tools necessary to expose fraud, document abuse, and hold bad actors accountable for their destructive behavior. 6 months after Victoria's water was permanently disconnected, I received a letter that had been forwarded through the post office's mail forwarding service from Victoria's new address. She had moved to an assisted living facility 3 states away where her adult children had finally stepped in to provide the emotional support, medical care, and social interaction she'd been desperately craving since her husband's death 5 years earlier. The letter was a rambling, handwritten apology that mixed genuine remorse with continued attempts to justify her behavior. But the important thing was that she was finally receiving professional help for her grief, mental health issues, and financial management problems that had led to her elaborate fraud operation. As I sat by my lake that evening roasting a perfectly golden marshmallow and watching the sun's reflect off the calm water surface, I couldn't help but reflect on how a simple camping tradition had accidentally exposed such an elaborate web of deception, desperation, and community dysfunction. Victoria had tried to stop my peaceful fire with fake government authority, and I'd responded by cutting off her stolen water with her illegal power exercised through proper channels. Sometimes justice really is that straightforward. Action shave natural consequences. Truth eventually surfaces despite elaborate deceptions, and people who consistently abase their perceived poor always overreach until they ultimately destroy themselves through their own poor choices and illegal behavior. What other HOA tyrants are hiding in your neighborhood? Comment your own horror story below. Type Karen if you've dealt with someone like Victoria.